Welcome to this lecture in the series Les Mercredis de l'Institut, the Wednesdays at the Institute. I'm Susan Boynton, the resident faculty director of the Institute for Ideas and Imagination. Our speaker this evening, Deborah Levy, is one of the fellows this year of the Institute. She writes plays, novels, essays, and poetry. She's written for the Royal Shakespeare Company, amongst others, and her theater work was described in the UK as, quote, pioneering writing that changed the form of our new drama. Her fiction includes Beautiful Mutants, Swallowing Geography, The Unloved, Billy and Girl, and her two recent Man Booker shortlisted novels, Swimming Home and Hot Milk, described in the Washington Post as the seductive pleasure of Levy's prose stems from its layered brilliance. Deborah Levy's two acclaimed living autobiographies, Things I Don't Want to Know and The Cost of Living, both on sale tonight, in the back of the room, were reviewed by The Telegraph as, quote, wise, subtle, and ironic. Levy's every sentence is a masterpiece of clarity and poise. Dwight Garner in the New York Times suggested, and I quote, the way to read Levy is in bulk. Her two most recent novels and her two memoirs are of a piece. To get the full effect of her elliptical genius, you need to pick them off all at once, the way you would a pint of blueberries. End quote. Deborah's anthology of stories, Black Vodka, was shortlisted for the Frank O'Connor International Short Story Award and broadcast on the BBC, as were her two dramatizations of Freud's iconic case studies, Dora and The Wolfman. Deborah was a fellow at both Trinity College, Cambridge, and the Royal College of Art, where she taught creative writing across all departments. And she's a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. So, her title tonight is The Psychopathology of the Doppelgänger, Creating a Twinned Self in Fiction. This is related to the work she's doing this year at the Institute for Ideas and Imagination. And we've decided, that is, our speaker has decided for this evening, we will not have a separate Q&A at the end of the talk. What we will do is we will gather in the back of the room. You can ask Deborah Levy questions as you look at the books that are for sale. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. It feels a little odd because I know there's just this head sort of poking up out of this podium, and I don't know what to do about that except move to this chair where perhaps a doppelganger lurks invisibly, or maybe even sort of do something a bit like this. My thanks to everyone at the Institute for Ideas and Imagination for your hospitality and for your intellectual company, and particularly to those at Columbia who imagined such an impressive endeavor in the first place and made it manifest at a time in the world when imaginations and ideas are thin on the ground. And a big welcome to you all tonight. I know you could be elsewhere, sipping an aperitif, falling in love, maybe out of love. I have for a long time wanted to write a fiction in which a female protagonist meets her double or doppelganger, from the German word meaning double walker or double goer. And tonight, I'm here to share some psychoanalytically inflected ideas as they continue to unfold and change during my fellowship. I think I do believe it's a radical project in an increasingly disembodied world to try and embody and dignify the strange conversation the double offers to us. And I'm looking forward to getting to know my uncanny avatars as I write the book, because I believe their job is to subvert conscious knowledge and tell us something that might be rewarding or confronting to know. So I thought I'd start by reading a three-page short story from my collection, story collection, titled Black Vodka. There isn't a doppelganger or double, as far as I know, in this story. But I'm reading it because it's the right palette for my subject. It explores the uncanny. Freud thought the uncanny was something that was familiar but alien at the same time. And this story is called Placing a Call. You are telling me something I don't want to hear. You are telling me the honest truth. We are standing in the garden and it is dusk. There are rain clouds in the sky and midges, and someone is planting a rose bush in the garden next door. The telephone is ringing. I run into the house and pick up the receiver. The telephone is pressed against my ear. Someone is calling and I am answering. I am saying hello into hard black plastic. But I hear the dial tone and the ringtone happening at the same time. Someone is missing. Someone is trying to get through. And then I remember there is a bird in the garden that imitates a telephone when it sings. I can see it now in the tree in the garden where you are telling me the honest truth. It is singing in an old-fashioned ringtone. It is singing like a landline. I run back into the garden and it's autumn, and there's a bird in the tree that imitates a telephone when it sings. Your hair is silver, but you are not old. Under your soft silver hair is your skull, with your central nervous system inside it. It is dusk, and it started to rain. The roots of the eucalyptus tree that grows in the garden are spreading under the house. Our daughter is sleeping inside the house, underneath a photograph of the sea. She is covered in a thick blanket. Her bed stands on a green carpet. There are 2 stains on the carpet. You are wearing a white shirt and a suit, and under your soft silver hair is your skull. While you speak the honest truth, I'm thinking about the time we ate horse steaks in Paris. The waiter served the dish of the day, and the dish of the day was horse. It was like eating a unicorn in the 21st century. But now we are standing in the garden and the telephone bird has stopped making calls. No one answers. The car alarms and police sirens have stopped too. Silence is cruel in cities where missing people need to hide in noise. But we are standing in the garden in the rain, and you have not stopped telling me the honest truth. And I wonder if the telephone bird will one day learn to sing computer startup sounds. Your silver hair is wet. Our daughter is pretending to sleep inside the house underneath a photograph of the sea, and she's listening to the rain, which always makes sorrow bigger and hard things softer. I walk towards you, bumping into things on the way. Kissing you is like new paint and old pain. It is like coffee and a stain, and it's like smoke. I am looking into your eyes, and I can't get in. You have changed the locks, and I have an old key that doesn't fit, and our daughter is making her way across the garden towards us, holding her thick blanket. You are telling me you are dead, and I say, yes, I know you are. We miss you, and since you've gone, I've forgotten all my PIN numbers. I can't remember the code to my gym locker, or where the honey is, or where I put the blue pillowcase. And could you tell me again where exactly the sea is in that photograph? Thank you. Here is a quote from the British writer J.G. Ballard that feels very close to how I approach any kind of writing. So this is Ballard. I try to find the unconscious logic that runs below the surface and look for the hidden wiring. It's as if there are all these strange lights and I'm looking for the wiring in the fuse box. I wonder where the wiring and the fuse box is in this painting titled Travelling Companions by Augustus Egg. He hatched these two female, perhaps not doubles, maybe sisters, maybe twins, I don't know, and stuck them in a first-class railway carriage. You can see the train is moving because the tassels by the windows are sort of in motion. I'll come back to this painting, but apparently the landscape, the sort of triptych out of the window is Menton in the French Riviera, where Catherine Mansfield also ended up. I am interested, but not fascinated, by the ways in which the male doppelganger has been embodied in the literature of E.T.A. Hoffmann, Die Doppelgänger, Dostoevsky's The Double, Edgar Allan Poe's William Wilson. Not fascinated, because here the doppelganger is always an antagonist, desperately trying to ruin the life of his double. Yes, an alter ego, a split self, at best a kind of ventriloquist to channel the more unseemly, awkward, and sometimes psychotic parts of the protagonist's disassociated self. Or a monster is unleashed, as in Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, where there is a struggle between extreme saintliness and extreme evil in the same person. Or the demonic double in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. What's for sure, though, is that doppelgangers have inner voices that split from each other, echo each other. And it seems with male doubles, with the exception of Borges in his story The Other, they wish to usurp or destroy the protagonist entirely. We see this in Oscar Wilde's Dorian Gray. And I should say that in no way in this project am I trying to find a true self or an authentic self. In fact, I agree with Oscar Wilde when he says, being natural is just a pose, and the most irritating pose I know. Now to go off-piste a bit, but nevertheless still walking in the footprints of the double, I think it's worth unfolding the dynamic of the bully in the playground. So there are lots of clinical terms to describe this, but I'm not going to use them. Let's say there's a 12-year-old boy in the playground and he feels scared, undermined, humiliated, enraged, powerless, and he's a bully. And these things are overwhelming to feel, so he can't feel them. And he needs to find someone else to feel them for him. So he looks around the playground. It could just as easily be a girl, this bully. And he sees another 12-year-old boy who looks a bit vulnerable and like they won't fight back. And the bully boy sets about making him feel enraged, powerless, angry, scared, humiliated, and undermined. So the bully has made a double to feel things for him. He's created himself in an other. Children do something like this with their toys. They project or pour into the hollow bodies of their dolls or teddy bears or whatever all kinds of anxieties, adventures, feelings, wishes, fantasies. They love their toys and punish them too, and in so doing imitate their parents or guardians. So we remember Lacan, who says we become who we are by imitating others. So a way of thinking about that is being 15 and wanting to laugh like your best friend laughs, or dance like your best friend dances, and practicing how you're going to do that. So all those imitations start very, very young. In the anthology, Essays on Dolls, Baudelaire and Rilke write about the ways in which children eventually yearn to see what's inside their toys and start to pull them apart. In Rilke's view, the child is searching for the doll soul. After dismembering it, the doll has been de-animized and is effectively dead. Here's Baudelaire from his exhilarating essay, The Philosophy of Toys. All children talk to their toys. Toys become actors in the great drama of life, scaled down inside the camera obscura of the childish brain. I believe that children in general act on their toys, and sometimes the toys can act upon the child. The overriding desire of most little brats is to get at and see the soul of their toys. This desire fills his fingers and nails with an extraordinary agility and strength. Finally, he prizes it open, for he is the stronger party, and there's nothing there. This moment marks the beginnings of stupor and melancholy. So, when you see a lot of dismembered dolls in a box at a book sale, you can be sure their owners wanted to end the lives they had imagined for their dolls. Or perhaps they replicants in the style of Blade Runner. When I teach writing, I sometimes ask students to write the fake biographies that the replicants had to learn in Blade Runner to pass as human. Girls of my generation played with Barbie dolls, and after a while we began to cut off their hair. The hair got shorter and shorter, and then we yanked off their heads. That seems to be the order of things. And we had a look inside. Oh my goodness, there's nothing there. She is hollow, headless, mute. A brand name tattooed on the back of her neck. Rilke. We mixed in the doll as if in a test tube, everything we were experiencing and could not recognize. So this is something of the dynamic I will run with in my fiction. Sometimes we can't feel love and someone else has to feel it for us, or we can't feel the reach of our own power, but someone else can do that for us. Sometimes we can't voice why we feel undermined, split, torn in two minds, or the ways in which a whole ideological system has broken into our minds and colonized it, one of the many subjects in Fanon's Black Skin, White Masks. It seems to me that in a time of rising nationalisms, where difference is demonized and feared, it might be interesting to look at apparent sameness, and by some weird trick I don't quite understand, discover difference on the way. So the purpose of the Doppelgänger theme for myself is not to investigate similarity, but difference. And then, forget all the over-explaining. What about the mystery, enigma, desire, erotics, poetry of the uncanny encounter with a double? So here are some slides. Sorry, I've got to just go back. Yes. Here are a few slides that I find quite inspiring to kick off with. I know that the lights are a bit bright in here, and they're not that easy to look at. This is Gabrielle Rossetti, How They Met Themselves, 1860. Seems to be two medieval knights encountering themselves in the woods. The woman is drawn from Rossetti's wife, Elizabeth Siddal, who was a laudanum addict, and apparently often kind of fainting and pale and spectral. Very strange. This is the French writer Claude Cahun, and photographer and sculptor, playing around with gender, playing around with very many personas. That's Claude Cahun as well. I like this one very much. This is a gecko camouflaging itself to become a leaf. Doing good, isn't it? And this is one of my favorite photographers, the American artist Francesca Woodman. She must be about 18, 19 when she took this portrait of herself. She was playing around with long exposure and camera shutter speed and self-exposure. And in most of her photographs, she's trying to disappear. She's making herself into a blur, an absence and a presence, although the boots in this photograph sort of land her. I've written a lot about Francesca Woodman. She suicided aged 21. And there is an idea, I don't know whether it's true or not, that somehow this obsession with disappearance is connected to that. I hope it's not. She would be my age now if she had lived. This is Andy Warhol. He's doubles of the Mona Lisa, who I'll be talking about in a while. The British artist Gillian Waring, her Doppelgänger project is almost like the opposite of Dorian Gray. I like it that she's looking into the mirror at an older version of her younger self. And this is Claude Cahun. In my new fiction, the working title is Double Vision. I am interested in the apparition of an identical female protagonist with nothing to do with the supernatural, although it does lurk in the wings, and perhaps the greatest avatar, perhaps not a double, but an apparition, a ghost, an allegory in literature, is Toni Morrison's Beloved, who comes back both embodied and disembodied to show how the brutal, inescapable past of slavery returns to haunt the present. I don't think that, I really don't think there is a book about a haunting that could ever beat Beloved. So this word, apparition, is important to me. And here's a quote from Joan Didion that feels right for my book. I've already lost touch with a couple of people I used to be. There was a time in my research where I thought that I might time travel with the Doppelgänger and have a contemporary modern woman travel back to Vienna and meet one of Freud's early 20th century hysterics, in the way that Virginia Woolf sort of time traveled with Orlando. I decided against it because I reckon that's been done before. But I want to show you a 6-minute film that I've made while I've been in Paris. It's a very oblique reference to my research, but nevertheless, it's useful to me. It's called Freud's Lost Lecture, and is an imagined lecture given by Freud himself to his female patients, as written by myself, and it's directed by my collaborator, Jane Thorburn.
Ladies and gentlemen, and especially the lady hysterics amongst you, I must thank you for achieving such articulate neurotic symptoms for my scrutiny. Your frozen limbs and the curious choreography of your words, the rich imagery you gave to me in the sealed envelope of your minds. I must thank you for the conscious access I was able to gain to the half-open doors of your childhood bedrooms, where porcelain ballerinas twirled in slow motion on the lids of your singing jewelry boxes. I would like to present to you a recent dream that caused me some consternation. I am going to leave it to you, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, to interpret this dream on my behalf. 2 snow leopards with pale blue eyes made their way into the kitchen of my last house in Maresfield Gardens, London. There, my pâtissière from Moravia was preoccupied with baking my weekly supply of Florentines. She bent over to stroke the leopards, and when she saw they did not bite her, she poured warm milk into her cupped hands and made strange little noises in her throat while they lapped the cream with their moist pink tongues. When they had their fill, she fed them the nuts and cherries left over from my Florentines. I watched them purr as their white tails whipped her ankles, and confess felt most unsettled when she sat on a chair and let them sleep across her bare feet under the table while she read the Psalms of St. Paul. At that moment, I realized I was growing the spots that had been erased from the blank page of the leopard's white fur. Emerging on my hands and arms were grey circles that were becoming black as time went on, rather like a photograph developing. What was it I was wishing for in my dream? Or, indeed, wishing away? Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, let me remind you once again of the ground we have covered in the course of 30 years of my lecturing at the University of Vienna. just as the escalators of history rise and fall in the metro stations that map urban Europe, my intention has been to give the Western world the mechanism with which to descend to all that is repressed and shameful. Oh yes, it is perhaps not so much the ground we have covered as the underground we have covered. Our achievement is to ascend intact rather than broken, and feel the wind near the exit sting the tears on our cheeks.
There's a fatal mistake in this film, which is that when Freud lectured at the University of Vienna, he used to start his lectures with, to lay people, he'd start his lectures with, ladies and gentlemen, and he'd end his lectures with, in conclusion, gentlemen. And I used to wonder where the ladies had gone. Had they gone out for a cigarette, to have a hysterical fit? What? But the actor had kind of added, in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen. And we couldn't find him again to record. The other thing is that many of Freud's patients, and this is slightly to do with the doppelganger, although obscure, I know, these young women had jewelry boxes with twirling ballerinas on them. And so I sort of wanted the ballerina to fly off and have another life. You see her on a ghost train and all the rest of it. So that this film, and I know that Jane Thorburn, my director, will be horrified that it's screened in this light and all of that. So it'll be screened again in Paris at a conference on hysteria and photography happening in Reed Hall later in February, and at the Regent Cinema in London. So why a female doppelganger? Apart from anything else, I think in a patriarchal society there will always be more work to do with a female character, more to untangle. And here I'm going to quote from my first living autobiography, Things I Don't Want to Know, which answers this question. When a female writer walks a female character into the center of her literary inquiry or into a forest, and this character starts to project shadow and light all over the place, she, the writer, will have to find a language that is in part to do with learning how to become a subject rather than a delusion, and in part to do with unknotting the ways she's been put together by the societal system in the first place. She will have to be canny how she sets about doing this, because she will have many delusions of her own. In fact, it would be best if she were uncanny when she sets about doing this. It's exhausting to learn how to become a subject. It's hard enough learning how to become a writer. There is always a haunting of sorts in the doppelganger theme, and it's probably to do with the past as much as fear of the future. Faulkner told us the past is never dead. It's not even past. And Freud sees the invention of doubling as a preservation against extinction. As he points out, the same desire led the ancient Egyptians to develop the art of making images of the dead in lasting materials. And the immortal soul maybe was the first double of the body. The doppelganger, also known as a fetch, refers to a wraith or apparition that casts no shadows, and that'll be very much in my mind when I begin writing this book next year. It'll be set in Paris, start at Père Lachaise, and possibly move on to Vienna. It makes sense to me to have a doppelganger hiding in Austria's long, low shadows, both literal and historic. Here's a quote on this matter from the artist Egon Schiele. In Vienna, there are shadows. The city is black and everything is done by rote. I want to be alone. I want to go to the Bohemian forest. Excuse me. I must see new things and investigate them. I want to taste dark water and see crackling trees and wild winds. I love that line. I must see new things and investigate them. This wraith or apparition that casts no shadow but is a replica of a double of a living person interests me because our first double, apart from the kind of mirror image, is our shadow. Children from the Stone Age to today have long been preoccupied with manipulating their shadows. Look, I'm making another me. They chase their shadows and try to control it, as if it were a marionette, making it taller, fatter, faster, slower. And then there is always an unconscious fear that the shadow will somehow take over, run away, have a mind of its own. Carl Jung regarded the shadow as the unknown, irrational, instinctive side of the personality, and Hans Christian Andersen certainly seems to agree in his little-known fairy tale, The Shadow, in which a learned man from a cold country travels to a hot country. His shadow runs away from him, starts having a life of its own. And it's interesting to me, because he's always Hans Christian Andersen is always saying the learned man from a cold country. He has to put him in a hot country. He has to sort of put the learned scholar, he has to make him a foreigner to begin this conversation about his shadow actually taking over his own autonomy. He has the strange line, a shadow always needs a master for his screen. Fiction is a good home for the reach of the human mind. It can give shelter to all the dimensions of consciousness, including the unconscious. If the writer is hospitable to this idea, and if the task interests her enough, she will find her own literary strategies to build her home. Consciousness, in this regard, does not mean streams of consciousness, but rather the consciousness of the entire composition of her story. This composition will have its very own writing behavior. I believe that when we write, we are only as interesting as how we think and where we are looking or how we are looking and who's looking back and what it is we are feeling and how that feeling is connected to history, the personal and political past, to the lives of others, or why we are yawning or blushing or trembling. I want to know how one thing connects to another. Or as Lacan nearly put it, what is the connection between potatoes and Thursdays? Or why we laugh when we don't feel like it, and who we laugh with and who we laugh at, and how we speak to a waiter, and how many jobs he or she has, and how many hours she or he sleeps, and who we love and who we really can't love, and why, and why, and why, and why, and why everything is sometimes mad and sad and beautiful and bad. Because there is this idea that fiction has to be relentlessly cheerful, nor should it be relentlessly despairing. But I'm interested in despair and consolation, in intimacy and solitude, and the ways we zone in and out of life. It's odd, because I believe that everyone has interesting thoughts and that no one lacks imagination. The human mind can go anywhere. In life, this is not always a good thing. We know that unwelcome thoughts can torment us, and we sometimes ingeniously find our own private magic to see them off. In art, there is a place for this kind of private magic. I'm guessing we become boring when our minds are numb and closed, and when we cannot tolerate doubt or ask the why, or when we have no interest in the subjectivities of others, or when, for many understandable reasons, we cannot access the apparently unknowing parts of our minds. When I create characters or avatars to carry my ideas into the world of my fictions, it is desirable to want to access the unknowing parts of their minds as well as their more conscious motivations. If a writer really believes in the unconscious, she will understand how we project our anxieties onto others and make of them the thing that we are. Very important for the doppelganger. All the same, I will not forget the French neurologist Charcot's best quote: "Theory is good, but it doesn't stop things from happening." The unconscious requires a certain kind of humility, a playfulness. It's going to mess up a neat story and plot, and it's going to mess up perfect sentences. Best of all, it's going to mess up self-righteousness. We really are not as good as we think we are, but maybe we're not as bad either. Is my female protagonist double literally physically identical? So here I'm thinking about Sandra Gilbert and Susan Gubar's feminist analysis of Charlotte Bronte's Madwoman in the Attic, and they see Jane Eyre, they see the Berta as Jane Eyre's darkest double, a projection of suppressed rage against the confined life of a governess. There is plenty of pressure available to numb our minds. In an increasingly corporate culture, human experience is reduced to many questionnaires we are invited to tick or cross. The questionnaire has implicitly written the story for us. We do not have to stutter and stumble and struggle for language, or put to work the imaginative reach of our minds, or put to work the skills a writer needs to hold many contradictory thoughts at the same time. I mean, if we really believed we could handle conflicting thoughts, there might not be so many doppelgangers haunting us, chasing us. With this in mind, and we often are in at least two minds about something, writers have to break into about 5 minds. That is to say, not just the subjectivities of others, but the cracks in the curb. We have to climb into the apparent reality of things to inhabit other bodies. So the most perverse cinematic doppelganger in Psycho, in Hitchcock's Psycho, is Norman and Norma Bates, where Norma Bates, the mother, actually inhabits Norman's body. And we know that Kafka's insect is really him. So we're breaking into a mental ecology as well as the ecology of a tree or the ocean. It is important and exciting, I believe, and I think doppelgangers believe this too, to say and think things we do not yet understand. If I am reaching for something that is there anyway in myself, in yourself, in the world, the struggle in the writing is to connect my thoughts and make visible something that is seemingly impossible to convey. There is an incredible book that conveys something impossibly difficult, and that's by the Lacanian psychoanalyst Darian Leader. Its title is Stealing the Mona Lisa, What Art Stops Us from Seeing. Leader interrogates the famous theft of the Mona Lisa from the Louvre in 1911. It was stolen by an Italian house painter, Vincenzo Perugia. It was a discreet and quiet theft. He simply took the painting off the wall and slipped it under his smock on a Sunday at a time when the Louvre was closed and lots of work was taken off the walls to be photographed. So the security guards, when they saw the painting was missing, thought that was what had happened to it. But it was what happened afterwards, when the theft was discovered, that was so interesting. It was the talk of Paris. The Mona Lisa became, in popular imagination, a kind of kidnapped woman, a woman who'd been abducted. Her image was displayed everywhere, newspaper reels, films, billboards. She was suddenly transformed from being an iconic classical painting into a celebrity, a film star. She was given agency, another life, an imagined life, a double life, because there were cartoons in the newspapers at the time, having her sip wine in cafes, have love affairs, speculating on what she was getting up to. The part that most interests me is the huge crowds who gathered at the Louvre to gaze at the empty space where the painting once hung. So even Kafka, who'd arrived in Paris 3 weeks after the theft, joined the queue to see the empty space. So why go stare at an empty space on the wall? As Leader pointed out, it was less a case of going to see a work of art because it was there than, on the contrary, because it wasn't there. Most things become more interesting to us when we've lost them. So here's the thing. Leader speculates that when the audience in their thousands gazed at the empty space where the Mona Lisa once hung, they were able to reflect on their own lost objects, whatever they were. The empty space was a comforting space to ruminate on their own loss. And he makes this really peculiar, interesting point. Emptiness is never just emptiness. It has to be formed. Something was present before emptiness. I think composers will understand this in relation to silence. Is there such a thing as silence? So although the doppelganger in my novel will be a presence absolutely embodied in the writing, she will also signify something that is lost to the female protagonist, who is apparently her double. She will be an absence of sorts. How's that going to work? I don't know. If I understood that, there'd be absolutely no point in writing the book. Sometimes coherence is not really coherence. Perhaps it is just an opinion, an argument, an old story we tell ourselves about ourselves. For example, the doppelganger might be there to help us lose the old story. That's not easy. I don't know about you, but I'm hanging on to mine for dear life. It keeps me together. I might fall apart without it. Complexity and coherence are twins. They are sort of doubles, staring at each other, looking away, always in secret conversation with each other. Any kind of coherence that flattens or sanitizes the world, or offers false consolations for the anxieties that make us interesting, or resolve conflicts and restore moral order in unbelievable ways, or that dulls the awkward, fragile, illogical, incoherent parts of living a life, simply doesn't have enough dimensions. And you can't really create a doppelganger with 2 dimensions. I want to show, as we come to the end of this talk, just the concept from Kiliowski's Double Life of Veronique. I don't know how many people here saw it. It's a major influence on my own thinking. It's made in 1991. Polish Veronica lives in Krakow. Veronique lives in Paris. And this clip is Veronica in Poland about to sing at a concert. And I believe that Kiliowski's note to her, director's note to her, was, you are reaching out to Veronique in Paris. You are trying to make a connection. So Kiliowski really shows what's at stake in that bid for transcendence and connection. She dies. She has a weak heart, but and her doppelganger in Paris feels pain in her body, not necessarily her heart at the same time. So the doppelganger is always a harbinger of death. It's not a good idea to actually meet your doppelganger. I'm just going to end with a reminder of the word double walker from the German, and a quote from Sebald from his 2001 novel Austerlitz. Austerlitz is a man burdened by memories that he cannot access. I never shook off the feeling that something very obvious, very manifest in itself was hidden from me. Sometimes it was as if I were in a dream. I felt as if an invisible twin brother were walking beside me, the reverse of a shadow, so to speak. At some time in the past, I thought, I must have made a mistake, and now I am living the wrong life. Later on, I walked through the deserted town and up to the fountain colonnade. I kept feeling as if someone else were walking beside me, or as if something had brushed against me. Thank you.